Hello, everybody. Welcome to Financing Philadelphia's Future. Thank you for taking time today to participate in this ongoing discussion about democratizing money, public banking, our financial ecosystem, and uh, policy for shared prosperity. My name is Peter Winslow. I'm substituting for Vanessa Lowe as your host since she has a scheduling conflict today. Our guest today is Tom Sgouros. We'll be discussing how workers' pensions can help solve the housing crisis, which is the subtitle of a recent report that Tom co-authored and co-edited. But before we get started, let me attend to some housekeeping announcements. FPF is a fast-paced half-hour recorded discussion. At 5 o'clock, we will stop recording, ask any media in attendance to leave, and then continue the conversation in an open forum. During the recording session, please use the chat to pose questions and pose comments. As the conversation progresses, I'll call on our chat monitor. We have a couple today, but our lead will be Connie Belay. Uh, and uh, and those questions and comments will help us focus or expand the discussion. So at the conclusion of this meeting, you're encouraged to record the chat by using the Save Chat feature found by clicking on the three dots at the top of the chat. You can find the recording of the discussion on the PBBC website and YouTube channel, uh, but you need to save the chat yourself. And Tim, please put the link to the uh, Public Banking Coalition website page in the chat for people's convenience. If you've not already subscribed to the PPPC forum, a mailing list, and wish to receive future press advisories and other communications, please put your name and contact email in the chat. We recommend that you use the speaker view setting at the top right corner of your screen, and that completes the housekeeping. So welcome back, Tom. Please
Thanks.
introduce yourself.
Oh, thanks for having me. Um, let's see. I am a longtime policy researcher, specializing, I think, mainly in the nerdiest possible topics, and over time that gravitated to public finance. I spent a couple of years as the senior policy advisor in the state treasury in Rhode Island, and um, and now I'm splitting my time between an appointment in the Data Science Institute at Brown University and writing for Americans for Financial Reform.
And Americans for Financial Reform were the sponsor of the report.
Yes, they and a group at the Kalmanovitz Institute at University of Maryland, I think.
I think
Um,
Georgetown.
oh, I'm sorry, at Georgetown. Yes. Oops. Um, thank you. There were lots of people. There were lots of people involved in this project. It was basically an attempt to say, look, there's all this pension money out there in the world, and a lot of it is engaged in fairly destructive ways in private equity that buys businesses and pillages them, or investing in residential real estate just to raise the rents. Uh, but it seems there are, and my favorite was actually this company RealPage that is it's basically software that's supposedly about helping landlords set rents, but basically what it is a way to sort of automate collusion, and allow landlords to figure out how high they can push the rent.
It's really price fixing.
Yeah, it's totally price fixing, but because it's being done behind an app somehow, the people involved in it somehow thought it was an okay thing to do, and it is there's a case in court now brought by a bunch of attorneys general, I think, to look at that. But that's a private equity funded software company, and it turns out that private equity uh, is supported by public pensions. You know, um, pension funds supply around two-thirds of the capital invested in private equity in the in the US. And I mean, that's a crazy amount of money. I mean, a crazy proportion. But it also makes you think that the pension funds should be um, pushing private equity to be more responsible. But also, there are a lot of things that pension funds could invest in that would be more constructive. And so this report was an attempt to sort of uh, uh, articulate the two sides of that debate, both to say, the things that you are invested in are destructive to, it's more than just ironic to use workers' money to make life work worse for workers, but
Right.
also to say that, hey, there are some pretty basic, uh, tested, uh, more constructive things to do. And so the second half of the report is sort of like a catalog of what are the more constructive things that have come out of these kinds of investments, and why and also why shouldn't they be scary, you know?
What was the proportion you said in private equity?
It turns out that private equity is around 50% of the part of the limited partners of limited partners of private equity partnerships, but it is 67% of the actual capital. These are numbers from a researcher at UNC who put together a really lovely report that that the report actually said that uh, the report said that um, it made the case actually that the most desperate pension funds turn to the most disreputable private equity firms, which was sort of um, a funny finding, but I think it's very true.
This is a national problem, but it certainly applies in Philadelphia.
Hmm.
The Pew Charitable Trust issued a report last July that identified that this was a report looking at the historical data from the beginning of this century for about 2 decades, and it found that one third of the single family housing units were bought each year by investors. That's 19,000 transactions, a third of which were private investors, which essentially means private equity.
Right. I mean, these are people who are in the housing market, but they're not in the market for housing, right? They're buying houses, but they're buying houses to make money. They're not buying houses to live in them.
And
And
the houses deteriorate and the price inflates, especially since most of these units that have been privately owned by individual homeowners, families over generations, once they get taken over, are made into rental properties.
right. And so what you have is you have all this capital that is not only driving up the cost of housing, but it's also depriving people of an asset that has been crucial to building wealth in families for the past 100 years, really. Well, 90 years. Uh, and so it's both taking away housing and taking away opportunity for families. It's
And this is housing that union workers live in, right? For the most,
Yeah, I mean it's housing that everybody lives in, but housing that workers live in. So I mean those are uh you know like it's like I said, when you realize that workers' money, which is basically what pension funds are, when you realize that workers' money is being used to make workers' lives worse, then you start to think, well, now, wait, why exactly are we doing this? What's the value of a pension if you can't actually afford a place to live uh, anymore?
so,
Like,
so Tom, that's sort of a, the big question. The elephant in the room is why are we doing this? And one of the things that we've noticed is that last week at the mayor's press conference, talking about Mission 30,000, which is the mayor's initiative in Philadelphia uh, to create 30,000 housing units, either new units or renovated units. And Ryan Boyer, who's the general manager for the Building and Construction Trades Council, uh, pledged in essence that he would help. The
Mhm.
pension fund for the trade unions would invest in the mayor's program. And so the question that I ask is there a difference between uh, private pensions like the one for the building trades and public pensions like the Philadelphia Board of Pension and Retirement that takes care of city workers, police, fire. Uh,
Mhm.
is there,
Sure.
what are the differences and what are put it this way, there are obviously differences. What are the relevant differences in terms of investment
Well,
between,
the important difference between private and public pension funds has to do with the owners, obviously, right? And the important distinction with the owners is that even though both the city and uh, the 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 sponsors of the construction trades pension fund, they can both go bankrupt, but but they won't both be liquidated, right? The risk of liquidation for the city of Philadelphia is vanishingly small. Um, and probably the if the and probably that's true of the building trades since it's probably a multi-employer pension fund. It is probably not just it is probably not dependent on any um, single private entity. So those two actually have quite a bit in common. And what that means is that they have the leeway to uh, like they have the leeway to invest a little bit more uh, for the good of their community than a single employer plan. A single employer plan has to maintain a certain level of funding in order for the promise of a pension to mean anything at all. Um, a city plan or a Taft-Hartley multi-employer plan um, is probably okay at lower than what they call full funding because of the stability of the employer that they or of the plan sponsor. But that means that there's very little excuse for them not to take on things that are good for their community. And it gets to the question of like what's the responsibility that the plan managers have to the plan um, members, right? And traditionally, the idea of fiduciary responsibility, when you ask lots of people currently involved in these things, they'll say, "Oh, we have a fiduciary responsibility to seek the highest return possible." And okay, that's one interpretation of what your fiduciary responsibility is. But if in seeking the highest return possible, you render all the housing in Philadelphia unaffordable, like that seems like a pretty narrowly defined and short-sighted view of what responsibility actually means, right? I mean, it has to be broader than just we've got to get the most money possible. You have a responsibility not just to get the money that's possible, but you also have a responsibility to be kind to your city, to the members that are there. You have a responsibility not to wreck the world. I mean, these are all serious responsibilities that I think have somehow gotten omitted from this kind of usual treatment of this kind of narrow treatment of fiduciary responsibility.
well, the building trades, there's an obvious benefit that the current workers have in investing in housing because they're the ones who will build the
Or
housing.
build it, right?
It gives them jobs. So there's a benefit while they're working, and there's a benefit while they're retired. Uh,
Yes,
that
totally.
it's not that connection is not as immediate for the policeman and a fireman, for example. Um, but on the other hand, uh, a, a healthier, wealthier city uh, is a better city to do policing and fire prevention. I would think.
Yeah, plus police and fire, policemen and firemen, policewomen and firewomen, they have to live somewhere, right? I mean, you can't have a city that has only places for rich people to live. I mean, you've got to have a mix of people. Otherwise, you wind up in these really toxic situations. There's a little island off the coast of Rhode Island, Block Island. It's a beautiful, beautiful little vacation spot. On Block Island, they don't even talk they do talk about the lack of affordable housing, but they also talk about the lack of attainable housing, right? I mean, their problem is that there isn't anywhere for somebody who's making a municipal salary to live on the island. So the morning ferry over to the island has all these people commuting to municipal jobs. It's nuts. And you don't want to you can't run a city that way.
That's a problem in Philadelphia also, and nationwide, that there's a shortage, a housing
Right.
shortage. So we've got compounded problems of gentrification and displacement that are all exacerbated by the current situation.
Right. And that's a lot of what this report is about is like, all right, so when challenged by pension trustees who say, well, okay, but what else should we do with our money beside invest it at the highest possible rate? And it turns out that there are actually some pretty good answers to that. And they're not just answers that, we made up. They're answers that have that section of the report is broken into three pieces, and one is examples from our own history. Totally um, uh, uncontroversial things that already exist. You go around. New York City has all these co-ops. Well, where did those co-ops come from? They came from people who saw the money that was in pension funds and saw that there was a more constructive way to invest it, and they did. And one of the important things that they recognized in New York and San Francisco, actually in Philadelphia too, was they recognized is that if you can find ways to cut the profit takers of the out of the system, that you can build more housing cheaper. So, for example, cooperative ownership at the end of it. There's other examples both from New York and from San Francisco where union activists essentially conjured into existence a nonprofit developer to do the actual construction. Again, looking for ways to sort of cut out the profit motive and make things less expensive that way. New York
The,
City also has this what do they call it? The Community Preservation Corporation, which is basically a bank. It's basically a nonprofit, not basically, it is a nonprofit bank. It was created by a bunch of banks in the 70s, I think, who I guess were feeling guilty. Somehow they pulled some money and they started making loans from this community preservation bank, Community Preservation Corporation. Um, and that wound up building a bunch of housing, a bunch of cooperative housing. And, you know, like these are solutions that people came up with that that nobody thought twice about, right? I mean, it's not like they're crazy radical things. It's like, well, we should do what New York did in the 70s, or we should do what San Francisco did in the 60s, right? It's not crazy. Then
supported
there's
the
a second.
Llama program.
I'm sorry.
Is that the support for the financing for the Mitchell Lama program in New York?
Mitchell-Lama was one of the ways that co-ops got built. That one involved not only what I was saying, cooperatives, but also there was a substantial public subsidy involved in those, um, which may or may not happen again. Uh, but that's not the only way that co-ops got built. Um, then there's another section of the report that says, hey, it's, you can look elsewhere too and say, what about these models that are from the Netherlands or from Australia, uh, or from the Greater Manchester Pension Fund has a pretty cool housing program going on too. Um, oh, and actually, I should also mention the AFL-CIO's Housing Investment Trust. That's here in the U.S. and they are actively looking for investments from pension funds, and they often do the kind of reciprocal things where, if for them to look at building a project here in response to an investment from here. And then the last section of the report is us saying, there are also some structures that you could come up with that are not very far-fetched, but are not often seen as public-owned entities. But those are feasible too. So, um, we live in a world now where there are these gargantuan asset managers, people who are buying up all the property and, all the residential real estate all over the place. There's no reason you can't have a public-owned one of those. And so that's an idea been floated by Lenore Palladino, who's a researcher at UMass Amherst, and seems to make perfect sense to me. I think that there's also room for doing a certain amount of wholesale banking from from a pension fund, and there, the structure would be really no different than your basic your basic building and loan thing. And the thing about an old-fashioned savings bank is it is basically an engine that is designed to produce a market rate of return for investors by making inexpensive loans, right? I mean, that's what a savings bank is, right? That's why, um, you know, that's why Jimmy Stewart. That's why Jimmy Stewart's father was doing that, was to make money and to help the community. But Mr. Potter across the street, he was making loans and making money too. And like these structures exist, and they are there for people with imagination and some uh, initiative to take them and run with them. And that's actually what some of the stories are that we reported about. Like the one in San Francisco was basically union activists in the well, I guess that was like the 30s and 40s, who made this happen. They conjured up a developer to be a nonprofit developer to build this stuff, and the result is 300 beautiful little garden apartments, and
Little
people are,
magic go a long way. Let's bring
yeah.
Deb Feigert into the conversation. Deb, if you can unmute and ask your question or make your comment.
Sure. Thanks, Tom. I have a question in the chat for you. What is a good response that we could give to pension boards who are arguing they don't have any experience with local ETI investing in housing or whatnot, and therefore they don't have staff who can provide this? So my question is, how and who on pension board staff or a consultant body can be trained to help them make these ETI investment decisions? What do we say to them?
Well, you can say to them that, hey, that expertise is out there. I just mentioned the AFL-CIO Housing Investment Trust. That is a building full of people who know how to do this, right? I mean, that's what they do. ETIs are economically targeted investments, and the Housing Investment Trust is there to take pension money and put it toward housing. I mean, that's what the H in Housing Investment Trust is about.
So the help
So
is there if it's asked for.
yes, it totally can be found. I mean, uh, the guys who are doing that, the guys who are saying that stuff, they also don't have a ton of experience evaluating energy stocks, for example, right? They don't have a ton of experience in evaluating utility stocks. when they need that advice, they go get it. So like that advice is available, and it's available from reputable places. Like I said, the Housing Investment Trust has been around since the 1970s. The Community Preservation Corporation has also been around since the 70s. Um, you know, it's possible if they want to do it. If they don't want to do it, there's 100 different reasons why not.
And there are portfolio managers hired by the pension fund have the capacity to do this as well.
Yeah, and the existence of those portfolio managers is why I was making fun of them of the pension staff before. The portfolio managers are there because they claim to have expertise in energy stocks or in utility investments or infrastructure investments or things like that. I mean, that's the world that's out there is that very few pension funds, I mean, really just the biggest of the pension funds have a ton of in-house investment expertise. Almost all of them rely on a large number of investment advisors, management advisors who are out there and selling their wares and selling their expertise. And you know, if you can't find what you need from the advisors that you're looking for, there are better advisors, or there are different advisors out there who have expertise in the places that they're talking about.
Great. Well, before we turn the recording off, I'd just like to have on the record a thank you to some of the folks who have shown up to attend this conversation, including folks from our city council. And we very much appreciate their attention to this issue, and hope to be working with them to bring this issue forward. Tom, before we turn off the recording and then continue the conversation at sort of an open Q&A, would you like to make the final comment or any
You mean apart from thanking you for for inviting me here, it's as you can tell, this is one of my favorite topics to talk about, and I can talk about it for a long time. Um, because I think it's a really important thing. Pension funds are where the money is. It used to be that it was insurance companies and banks that was where the money is, but it turns out that these days pension funds are where the money is, and making sure that that this colossal amount of money is managed in a way that will actually make our lives better is, I think, really a fundamental step in improving the way things are right now. Somewhere in the chat, somebody said something about, is anything progressive or constructive or enlightened going to be approved in the next 4 years? And the answer is yes. Yes. Like, the federal government has no say over how Philadelphia invests its pension funds. So whatever mismanagement or craziness is going on in Washington is not immediately it's indirectly, but it's not immediately relevant to the investment decisions that some pension fund board makes, and they
and
can
these are
choose.
local issues that we can deal with on a local basis, on a
Yeah,
state
exactly.
basis or a city basis, or
Right, and
by private entity, private pension funds.
yeah, and they can choose to make these decisions, and they can choose them to make lives better for their members, or they can choose otherwise. And I just happen to think that they should choose to make life better for their members.
Well, I certainly agree, and I think most of the folks, certainly in the Philadelphia Public Banking Coalition, agree as well. And we're hoping that we can expand this conversation, and have it be a robust public examination of all the issues and possibilities to identify what the impediments might be and see if they are serious enough to stop moving forward, or if they can be overcome in some practical, collaborative way. So thank you so much.
Thank you.